from septic to sewer, you've solved the problem. But you haven't. So when that waste flushes down your toilet and goes to the sewer treatment plant, it goes through a lot of stages, but it has two products that it has to produce. And one of them is water and one of them is biosludge. There's no way around that in our current system. And it's very important, actually, that they do produce those. If they disappeared, we'd all be in trouble, because you need to introduce the water back into the water cycle and the nutrients back into the nutrient cycle, because this is a spaceship. Spaceship Earth has closed systems. We can't, there's no throwing stuff out. It all has to come back into the system. Now, this is particularly true here in Florida, where we're starting to have a lot of problems with saltwater intrusion into the aquifer. And this is because we've been constantly pulling water out of the aquifer to water our lawns and gardens and farmland. And so you take the pressure off the aquifer and salt water starts intruding. And that's actually what's happened to Johns Island, and why they're now running a pipe for millions of dollars under the Indian River Lagoon, or that's what they're proposing, in order to draw more water now from the Indian River wastewater treatment plant. We did test that one as well and found they too have secondary treatment, but they have an algae scrubber as well, and their nutrient levels are much lower. I'll kind of cut to the chase on the reuse water issue. I think it's a case-by-case basis. You have to monitor this. You actually have to test it at the sprinkler heads to know what the nutrient loads are that are. But I mean, we need to be using this reused water, absolutely, but we need to make sure that the nutrients are out of it before it's being put on our lawns and gardens. And we need to know how much nutrient it is delivering, because maybe you don't need a fertilizer service at all, and you're just adding to the Indian River Lagoon's woes. You could actually be saving yourself money, but you have to test to be actually able to know that. And then there's the nutrient cycle. And so when you flush your stuff down the toilet, it goes through your wastewater treatment plant, you create the biosolids. Well, ideally what you want to do is put them back into plant growth. But there's a few problems with that. And so going back to my 80-20 rule issue, is it worth converting septic to sewer, knowing that you're going to have to still deal with the biosolids and the reuse water, and some of the other issues that you're going to have? So if we look in the St. Lucie estuary, we have a number of sources of data that we can look at to see how much septic is contributing to our nitrogen load in the St. Lucie estuary. So Gary Goforth, who's worked as a consultant for the South Florida Water Management District, has done a summary of flows and loads over the past few years. And so this is actually using data that's been collected by South Florida Water Management District. And basically what they're doing is looking at how much water is coming out of the major inputs, the C44, the C23, the C24, and how much of a nutrient load is carrying when it comes out. And when he does that analysis for 2017, he found that about half of the nitrogen load was coming from agriculture, about half from Lake Okeechobee, which of course includes some agriculture, but we won't go into that right now. But he, by his estimate, the contribution from septic tanks, based on land use calculations, is 231,000 pounds, or about 4% of the total nitrogen load coming into the St. Lucie estuary. Now, in 2018, obviously the year's not over, but this is what he's gotten so far. Contribution from agriculture has been higher this year, but you know, the year's not over yet. And in this case, we're at 8% of the total nitrogen load in this St. Lucie River estuary is coming from septic. Looking for other sources of data, this was a study that was done in 2013 to estimate the septic loads that were coming in so that they could figure out how much of a credit they could get for moving septic to sewer. And they don't actually give the number in this report of what percentage is contributed by septic, but if you go to page 70, there's a table that gives you all the numbers you need to calculate it yourself. And when you do, you find out that in this case, they say that 9.6% of the nitrogen load coming into the St. Lucie estuary is coming from septic. And just as a further sanity check, I looked at some other places that have done these kinds of analyses. And for example, Chesapeake Bay, when they did an analysis in 2010, they found that the septic systems contributed about 4% of the nitrogen load. And they found the same thing in earlier years. In 2004 was another study I found. And then Tampa Bay, which is like us, is its nitrogen loading from septic systems is about 5% per year. So by the 80-20 rule, my estimate would be that probably converting septic to sewer on a large scale may not be the best use of our dollars at this time. It's probably worth it. I've got some more things. I can use those. That's all right. It's probably worth it when you've got obviously bad septic systems, and there's some communities that have really old septic, and they're going to have major problems unless they do the conversion. But just to do it on an estuary-wide basis, I don't think makes a lot of sense. Now, if we start thinking about moving to sewer, now we've got to deal with the biosludge problem. And we have a clear example locally of what biosludge can do because of what's been going on at Blue Cypress Lake. I hope many of you have seen this beautiful environmental gem. It's absolutely exquisite. Go while you still can. So it's got over 300 active osprey nests on this little lake. And that's more per acre than anywhere else in the United States. But it started to have problems recently, and they seem to be linked to the fact that biosludge has been being spread on this ranch right in the watershed for Blue Cypress Lake. Biosludge is actually, it's not local biosludge. It's being brought up from Miami. Miami and Broward County. You can still see the steam rising off of it here. Totally gross. These are actually Class B biosolids. They're not doing anything illegal. This is absolutely legal. They've got signs posted as they're supposed to do. These are pictures that were taken by Barb Burr, who lives out on Blue Cypress Lake. And the community out there has been saying that they've been starting to see algae blooms. And the problem apparently arose because a change was made in 2013. So after 2013, the legislature banned Class B biosolids in the Lake Okeechobee, St. Lucie River, and Caloosahatchee River watersheds. So now they're being distributed in the St. Johns River Basin and Indian River County. And so if you can look this up for yourself. It's available on the DEP website. I looked up the tonnage of biosludge that has been distributed on Presley Ranch next to Blue Cypress Lake, and the numbers are staggering. So since 2013, when this began, they have spread 22,338 total dry tons. In 2017, that's 5,277 dry tons, which is equivalent to about 750,000 pounds of nitrogen. It's unbelievable. And for the phosphorus guy, it's equivalent to 0.3 million pounds of phosphorus. Also not a very good thing. And as a consequence, this has happened on a lake that never had anything like this before. according to the residents. I mean, I just have to take their word on it. But they've had, this year, some pretty bad blue-green algae blooms. These are also pictures by Barb Burr, who took the sample that you see on the right and brought it to Orca. And when we tested it, that sample had 4,700 parts per billion of microcystin in it. So that's really, really toxic. Now, as a consequence of the noise that we and others have been making about this, a couple of good things have happened recently, and we could all use some good news, so I wanted to share it. The first is that on July 18th, there was a moratorium set on the distribution of biosolids at Presley Farms next to Blue Cypress Lake, a 6-month moratorium, so they can assess the impact of the biosludge. We're working on it. And then, in this story by our own Tyler Treadway, last Friday, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council approved a resolution calling for the phasing out of land application of so-called biosolids and seeking money for pilot programs to develop alternative ways to dispose of partially treated sewage. Now, when we're talking about disposing of sewage, there's one other thing that we need to be aware of. It doesn't get discussed much, but it's starting to come to the forefront. And sewage is starting to be called the new frontier of public health, because not only do we have these problems with nutrients and how they're feeding these toxic algae blooms, but we have these contaminants of emerging concern. And these include pharmaceuticals, personal care products, pesticides, herbicides, endocrine-disrupting compounds such as come from flame retardants, and all of these are going into our wastewater system, and they're not being generally removed by our wastewater treatment plants. Now, they are in tiny, tiny quantities, but those quantities, as our population grows, is growing. And you know, there's things like these highly fluorinated compounds that are a result of Scotchgard and Teflon. They are very, very persistent pollutants. They don't go away, and they are known carcinogens. They can cause thyroid disease and immune suppression. And it's scary when you see a headline like this, which was in May in 2018, where you had a mass mortality of freshwater turtles. These guys are actually pretty tough critters. And there was a mass mortality, and in the article it said that the mortalities were seen in areas near sites where sewage sludge is allowed to be spread as fertilizer. This was in the St. Johns River water basin. So we don't really know what killed these turtles, but you got to at least be concerned about the possible implications of the biosludge. And these contaminants of emerging concern are not widely studied, but there are few studies out there that show that, just like microcystin, they can be taken up by food crops. So there was this study that came out at the end of last year, looking at microcystin in food crops. It's actually a pretty good study. Clearly showed that microcystin is taken up by food crops. But it showed something else, and I know we've got a representative from the farm community here, and I would like to point out that I'm very pro-farm. I come from farm families, and you know, we all want to eat. We got to figure out how to solve these problems together. So, but the farmers might want to be aware that microcystin may be impacting their crop yields much more than they realize. So in this study, they irrigated lettuce, carrots, and beans with no parts per billion of microcystin, 1 part per billion, 5 parts per billion, and 10 parts per billion. Those are all environmentally very reasonable levels, as we've just seen. And you can see that the lettuce is smaller, the carrots are much smaller, the beans, not only are the numbers down, but you know, they're shriveled. And so I think we need to be looking more closely at how these toxins might be impacting our crop yields, and also impacting the imbalance we seem to have between nitrogen in and nitrogen out. We're bringing more nitrogen into our community than is being shipped out and producing cattle. And so our problems are just continuing to grow worse. So this was the results from that particular study from Food Research International. And it shows that microcystin in irrigation water is a significant pathway for human exposure. Microcystin accumulated in crops and soil when grown with contaminated water. The crops lost their quality and productivity from microcystin exposure. I think that's really, really important and needs to be discussed more. Microcystin from irrigation water persisted in the soil after the crops were harvested, and consumption of crops grown with microcystin-tainted water poses a high health risk. They're not pulling their punches at all in this study. So, what are our choices? Because we want to live in a healthy environment for us, and we want our lagoon back the way it used to be. So, at Orca, part of our mission statement involves restoring aquatic ecosystems by developing innovative technologies and science-based conservation action. And I'm a techie. I love tech. And I think tech can be a solution for a lot of us. And there is hope on the horizon. And given the kind of state that we're in, I think we should be thinking outside the box a little bit. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this or have seen this picture, but Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was looking to solve the wastewater issues in third world countries. Places like Dakar, Senegal, where there is no plumbing at all, just open sewage pits, no running water at all, and people are getting horribly sick from it. So they went to a guy named Peter Janicki, who has absolutely no background in wastewater treatment, but he is head of Janicki Industries. He's a techie, and basically a pretty innovative, brilliant guy. And Bill Gates, tasked him with trying to solve this problem, and he said, "I don't know anything about wastewater." And Gates said, "Figure it out." So of course he had the backing of the Gates Foundation, which made life a little easier for him. But if you go online and look up Janicki Omnip Processor, that is the wastewater treatment plant facility that Janicki developed. Now we can't get it here in this country, at least not exactly, because it was bought with not-for-profit funds, and it's now installed in Dakar, Senegal. But Janicki has started a separate from Janicki Industries, another firm called Janicki Bioengineering, and I think it could be a game changer. I don't have the proof of this, but I'm optimistic that it could be a major game changer. And so they have plants that they're starting to set up in Washington State, and these plants convert sewage into clean water that's actually drinkable, electricity that is actually in excess of what they need to run the plant from burning the sludge, and nutrients. And they also are removing contaminants of emerging concern. So I think that we need to come together as a community, and I can't think of a better group than this, to lead the charge and do what the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council just did. Get all of our communities together and ask that we phase out the land application of biosolids and seek money for pilot programs to develop alternative ways to dispose of our sewage, because it's clearly a major player in what's going on with our lagoon. Our chairman of Orca, Wayne Mills, used to be head of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And I don't know if you know this, but Chesapeake Bay is one of the few places that's now become a success story. It took them decades, but one of the things they finally did was they went for advanced wastewater treatment, not this advanced, and I think we could be on the leading edge of something that could actually make money for all of us, because Janicki claims that these give you return on investment within 3 years, which is astonishing. But we can clean up our water and show just incredible advancements. So I will close with that and take questions. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to know, I assume you are aware of some of this, what other industrialized countries which are on the water, such as the Netherlands, Denmark, who have a reputation for doing things well, how are they dealing with these issues?
So they use advanced wastewater treatment, and, you know, this engineering has advanced considerably. And I don't want to downgrade, you know, we have some very, very talented people in the wastewater treatment industry here. They're using, you know, very advanced techniques, and some of them are producing, you know, the cleanest water they can, although not necessarily dealing with the contaminants of emerging concern. But this, as I said, this has been gradually evolving, and some of the plants are doing a pretty good job of it. But the thing is that I think we could just take it to the next level and potentially make money from it. This could actually, you know, turn it around. The problem is that there's a very conservative attitude towards making any changes, because as the wastewater treatment plant people will tell you, if something goes wrong, the shit just keeps coming. So they don't have a lot of interest in trying new things. So that's something we have to overcome. But I view what's going on in the Indian River Lagoon, especially around here, is being in fourth stage cancer. You know, what you want to do is get yourself in a clinical trial, for God's sakes. Try something. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Dr. Weir, thank you very much for your presentation. You had mentioned that there was a lack of funding from the state with regards to your measurement devices. What, if anything, has the state done well with regards to managing this problem? And what can the state do to adequately address this in the future?
So monitoring is absolutely essential. And you've got a mantra out there that's, oh, we don't need more monitoring, we know what's going on. That's not how you solve the problem. It's like if you go into an emergency room and you're sick, the first thing they do is slap monitors all over you to figure out what's wrong with you, and then figure out if what they're doing is making you better or not worse. If your doctor comes in and says, you know what, all these monitors, they just cost too much money. I think we're just gonna come in and check you with a stethoscope every other week. It doesn't cut it. And so, you need monitoring to be able to show where the pollution is coming from. Question number 3.
My question is in reference to, I think it's historically known for the last 30 years, the amount of water coming into the lake from the north is historically about the same. What has changed in the last few years from what I was told by Mark Perry, that these algal blooms are new since 2004. So the historical amount of water is about the same, but now we're getting these blooms. What do you attribute from the Kissimmee Basin, we're not necessarily seeing more water, and that's discussed a lot, but that's not the issue. What we're seeing, I believe, is, because it's clearly, what we're getting algal blooms is from the lake. I mean, that's clear. It comes right through S80, so there's no question that it's coming from the lake. What, do you know of any causation in reference to the amount of nutrients coming from the Kissimmee Basin into the lake?
So I have a hypothesis, and I emphasize it is only a hypothesis. People have been saying for a while that we're seeing an increase in these blue-green toxic algae blooms worldwide. And it's been attributed to an increase in temperature, which has always bothered me a little bit, because organisms have a pretty wide tolerance. I mean, there's no question it would improve, but not improve their growth, I should say. But not quite to the degree that I would expect. But there's another link here, and this is based on work done by John Trefry at FIT. He's a biogeochemist, and he has looked at the amount of ammonia that is coming out of the muck. And if you look at ammonia flux from the muck relative to temperature, it's an exponential curve. so my hypothesis is that the increased temperatures that we're receiving, I mean, we've had the last 2 years have been the hottest years on record, are driving ammonia into the system, and boy, do blue-green algae love ammonia. It's a reduced form of nitrogen, it's like a Big Mac to them. So, and I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's my thinking on it right now.
Question number 4. Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Dr. Witter, this is great. Probably many of us in the community received this in the mail. And I'd just like you to speak, hear what you have to say about deep water injection.
We all got meal propaganda.
So, the wastewater treatment plants have to get rid of the water, and Lake Okeechobee has too much water, they have to get rid of the water. And so there's this idea of injecting deep into the deep aquifers.
Including everything.
Below the drinking water table, supposedly. I have great concerns with it. Well, first of all, it's pulling the water out of the cycle, which I think is a bad idea. You're contaminating the deep water aquifer in ways that you have no idea what that could be. There can be leakages from the deep to the shallow, especially here in Florida. So I don't claim to be an expert on this, but my instinct is it's not a great idea.
And of course, Dr. Witter will answer any of your questions if you call her, and hopefully she'll give us the number before she leaves.
I have a question about cyanobacteria. Are you guys familiar with the toxin BMAA? Is it being studied? Is it something in the future that we will get to hear more about here?
Yeah, so I personally am very concerned about BMAA, but I didn't discuss it because it's, there's more controversy surrounding that than with microcystin. Really with microcystin, there's not too much controversy about it. But the problem with BMAA is it's an extremely small molecule, which makes it difficult to measure accurately. And so there's a lot of contention in the scientific community about who's doing it right and who's not doing it. I didn't want to wade into that. But you should be aware that cyanobacteria, some of them can produce this molecule called BMAA, which stands for beta-methylaminoalanine. And it is what is known as a non-proteinaceous amino acid, which sounds like a mouthful, but amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And we call it non-proteinaceous because isn't one of the amino acids that we generally use. But according to the thinking on this, our bodies mistake it, BMAA, for serine, which is one of the amino acids that we use. And so if protein gets made with BMAA instead of serine, then it misfolds and forms those plaques in the brain that are associated with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. And there are some correlative studies showing higher incidences of
This is serious.
ALS.
This is really serious stuff.
Speaking as a neurobiologist, I'm someone whose mother died of Alzheimer's and brother of Parkinson's. I care a lot about this, but I try very hard not to be an alarmist because, as I said, that there is good reason to be concerned about the data in some cases because it is so difficult to measure accurately.
Let's have another round of applause. Great, thank you very much. Dr. Witter said she'll be putting some business cards up here. If you'd like to contact Orca or her, or of course you can just go online. So at this time, I want to say thank you to Dr. Witter, and she may have have to leave for another appointment at this time. We have about 30 minutes left, and Daryl Brand is going to come forward, and this is our action item area. And although this isn't a traditional action item, this is an item we must be actionable about.
Thank you. We lost another icon in the environmental and water. Let me start over again. Mr. Nathaniel Reed, Nate Reed, passed away this last month, and this is the second member of our community who meant a lot to this organization. And I just want to go over, many of you know him, he's been here on several occasions, but before we do a moment of silence for him, I just want to give a little background. Nathaniel Nate Reed is an environmental advisor. He was advisor for 6 Florida governors, Assistant Secretary of the Interior to the Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and is considered one of the founders of modern conservation movement. And there's several quotes from this article, but this one stands out. Floridians for generations to come are indebted to Nathaniel Reed for protecting our beautiful environment and our Florida Everglades. We will honor his memory by recommitting ourselves to being good stewards of our environment. And let's, moment of silence, please. Thank you. And I know in the past, we have talked about the history of this organization, and for some of you that are new to the area, sure. We have, just so everybody knows, the Rivers Coalition has had many names before this: Rivers Initiative, Rivers Restoration League. But anyway, I've shown this. This is from 1961 Stuart News, talking about exactly what we're talking about today.
Not the Alps.
Not the district.
The discharges. This is, before Mr. Bud Jordan left, the last organization that he started, he handed me a binder, which at future meetings I'll share some of the contents, but this is a report from 1998, here we are today.